Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science. News just in, Crystal Kenny has heard that her sentencing hearing has been pushed to January the 28th. You may recall that she agreed to a plea deal for Class 6 felony, which means she could face no jail time whatsoever for her role in the cover-up of the Patrick Frazee murder of Kelsey Bereth. Patrick Frazee was found guilty a couple of weeks ago, about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and sentenced to life without parole, plus I think 156 years. I'm currently working on a book on Patrick Frazee. It should be out by next Monday. I've been slowed down just by the volume of YouTube videos I've been putting out, and quite a few of my readers are quite upset because I normally deliver a book within about 2 weeks of when all the information comes out, and it's now 2 weeks, so yeah, it's going to be 1 week longer for you guys, but for those interested in the Frazee case, Crystal Kenny will know her fate, which will either be no jail time whatsoever, or it will be a maximum of 3 years. I've really found the Patrick Frazee case an incredible case to go into after Chris Watts. To juxtapose both these cases is really fascinating, and that's why I've got a section in the book, Murder Most Foul, that is devoted to literally juxtaposing various aspects, comparing the criminals, the mistresses, the crimes, the whole situation between Patrick Frazee and Chris Watts. It really is really interesting. In terms of Patreon, I've just put up my first video. It's about 51 minutes long. It was quite fun putting it together, if quite technical, because I was juxtaposing an FBI profiler's original opinion way back in August 17, and this video was viewed 1 million times, and I think her view actually infected a lot of people with the idea of a sort of selfish, self-absorbed narcissist, an arrogant kind of individual, and people have taken that, and it still is how people think of Chris Watts today. And so that particular video supports some of what this expert says and challenges other things, and I think some people may find it really interesting. So if you're interested, head over to Patreon and check it out. For the others, all 3,000 of you on this channel, I want to say a sincere thank you. I appreciate the many of you who have been with this channel all along, and I want to extend a hearty welcome to the newcomers. I hope that we're going to have a fruitful journey together and learn a lot about one another, and learn a lot about the world of true crime, and also the world that we live in. And so without any further ado, welcome to all of you. If you're here for the first time, please do subscribe, like, share, leave a comment, and let's get started. So this episode presents a brand new series on this channel. It is a look through the rearview mirror, but in a different way. So in other words, even though we're looking backwards in time, we're following that view forwards in time. Now if that's mind-bending, it'll soon be made quite clear. Way back when I started Crime Rocket, I saw the merit in putting together an archive of news as it was unfolding. So even though I was putting up crime news updated daily, on the Watts case, I was also just putting up news as it was unfolding. So even though I was putting up crime news updated daily, on the Watts case, I was also just putting up crime news updated daily on the Watts case, I was also just putting up crime news updated daily on the Watts case, I was also just putting up crime news updated daily on the Watts case, I was also just putting up crime news updated daily on the Watts case, I was also just putting up crime news updated daily on the Watts case, I was also just putting up crime news updated daily on the Watts case, I was also just putting up crime news updated daily on the Watts case, I was also just putting up crime news updated daily on the Watts case, I was also just putting up crime news updated daily on the Watts case, I was also just putting up crime news updated daily on the Watts case, I was also just putting up crime news updated daily on the Watts case, I was also just putting up crime news updated daily on the Watts case, I was also just putting up crime news updated daily on the collating all the sort of new facts. As I was becoming aware of facts, I was putting them down in numerical order. And why I did it was I wanted to see at what point new information came out, and at what point did certain new information then sort of update or contradict or invalidate other information. And you're about to experience why that kind of real-time reporting and recording and archiving is so important and fascinating with true crime. We tend to always look at the world and what we know about our memories and what we think we know in the rearview mirror, but what we don't realize is our memories are constantly shifting, our realities are constantly shifting. Pieces of the puzzle are constantly being pulled out and replaced with other pieces, and so it's easy to forget how an original narrative was a certain way and how it got changed, how it got pulled out of proportion, how it got yanked from one place to another. It's easy to miss that. And so I'm sure a lot of you are going to find this really interesting. There will be quite a few episodes in this, so let's get to episode 1. And so I began this process of archiving and recording from the mid to end August 2018, and as I say, I numbered all of my facts in terms of each month. I just numbered them just to keep them in their own little category and in their own little place. And so let's start with number 1. Christopher was seen barbecuing by himself by a neighbor at 19:15 on August 12th, the night before the murders. The operative word here is by himself. And the neighbor that saw him was Betty Marcoux, the neighbor on the right side if you're looking at the front door facing the garage. And yeah, as late as 7:15 he was barbecuing by himself, and she noticed him. That same neighbor noticed him up at 5:15 early in the morning, much earlier than he would usually be out. So that was also quite interesting. There's also a link to that story, so anywhere where you see the green text means you can actually click through and read the story yourself. So that was the first thing that for me was kind of new, original, significant, important information. Then number 2, bear in mind this is very early on, so even at this point I wasn't spelling Shanann's name with the apostrophe. That would also change as more information came to light. But the second thing that I came across was that Shanann's flight was unexpectedly delayed by 3 hours, and that's why she arrived home at 01:48 on Monday, August 13th. So that was also information that came through fairly early, but we didn't know. We knew a flight was delayed. It took a while to find out exactly by how long and exactly when she arrived home. Number 3, in the days before her death, Shanann shared fears with friends that Chris was cheating on her. She also complained of not feeling well. So this is quite incredible. Bear in mind that this list was made very early on, and so some of the earliest reports was that Shanann wasn't feeling well, and we can sit here today and say, well, maybe it had something to do with the pregnancy, or maybe she was stressed, but it could also have been that not feeling well may have been something beyond the pregnancy. It may have had something to do with Chris Watts trying to poison her, trying to bring about a miscarriage. I personally believe that, but one can see how it's disguised in the malaise of pregnancy, that you're not going to know where that ends and where the crime aspect is beginning, and that's exactly what a sneaky guy like Chris Watts is counting on. The other thing is just that before she died, Shanann did suspect that he was cheating on her, and what you can imagine in a scenario like that is, we know in retrospect that the crime happened. We know in retrospect that Chris Watts murdered his wife. But if you go into real time and you say, before the crime, his wife suspected he was having an affair. Now you can imagine if he persisted with asking her for a divorce, she would have fought him. She would have said, you betrayed me, I'm going to take you to the cleaners, I know you're cheating on me, you're going to pay for this, kind of thing. And he must have been aware of that. Number 4, on May 7th, 2018, the Watts family appeared in Strive magazine, the official magazine for Thrive brand promoters. So that's quite important, that date. May 7th was very close to the time that Shanann fell pregnant. I think that appearing in a magazine was a big deal for Shanann. It may also have been a big deal for Chris Watts at that time. And what I mean is, look, I've written for magazines, I've been published in magazines, I've had models or certain people or celebrities, interviewed them. It takes a while after the interview for that person to appear. It can be 2-3 months, sometimes even longer. And often there's quite a lot of excitement around it. There's anticipation for when it's coming out. Some people want to check the story before it goes in. Some people are just really flattered and just, very happy to be the focus of, a magazine article. And it's nice for them to have photos taken of themselves, high quality photos. It's nice for them to be splashed over in a magazine that's going to be seen by possibly tens of thousands of people. So I can imagine this is a huge deal for Shanann especially. In a weird way, I think Watts also felt he was being pulled into something. He's almost an unwilling actor in Shanann's story, and maybe he wants his own story. It's just interesting to think about that date. How would Watts have felt about that? Would he also have been excited, or would his mind already have been changing? Number 5, in the article, Shanann articulated how she turned herself inside out to make others happy. And I find this such an ironic statement to make, because one also has that impression to some extent with Chris Watts pre the crime. One kind of has the impression that he did a lot of chores at home, that he was kind of in a way like a dog's body. He just did a lot, and he was also trying to make Shanann happy while the marriage was happy and while everything was going on. I'm not sure if one would say he turned himself inside out, but one does have the impression that he was kind of a people pleaser. He wanted people to think highly of him, and so we get that kind of impression from Shanann as well, except that she says in the article that she's now changing her identity. So she has a change of identity in this particular article. And this is a quote from Shanann. She says, "My role was as a caretaker and to make people feel better, yet I was wiped out. I was working 65 hours a week and was also taking care of my kids. I rarely got any sleep, but my passion for wanting more for my kids was stronger than anything else." And bear in mind, this is part of a spiel for Thrive, but what she's kind of saying here is, prior to basically when this article came out, sometime in the past, Shanann was a caretaker. She worked very, very hard. She worked 65 hours a week. Just this, this impression of someone working very, very hard. And then we're not looking at the rest of the article, but one can imagine that she then got on to Thrive, and then her life changed. And then everything was just, I guess a lot easier. And she was no longer just a caretaker. I mean, one needs to read the article to get what she's saying, but one can sort of almost imagine that she was less exhausted afterwards, and she was maybe getting more sleep or whatever it was, and her health came back. But one must also wonder, whatever this change was when Shanann resetted herself, how did this impact Chris Watts? And I think an even more pertinent point, even stronger argument than that one, is what about Chris Watts? Did Thrive also have this impact on him, where he was also thinking of himself as a caretaker, and he was also wiped out, and he was also working a lot, and then suddenly when he took Thrive, he had enough energy and enough, I don't know, some kind of a second life or a second wind, that he started thinking about other things that he could have or other things that he wanted in his life. And the whole Thrive thing was geared to doing that, to saying, be all you can be. You can, anything you dream of, you can have. Do you want to thrive? Well, then thrive. Just make the choice. And didn't that psychology get into Watts's mind? It's just something to think about in terms of that article. Then point number 6, Nicole Atkinson, which at this point I was spelling incorrectly without the K. I just pointed her out as the friend who last saw Shanann alive. She attended the same business trip, so this time this information was quite new. And then Atkinson described the last time she saw Shanann after dropping her off from the airport. She went inside, turned around, and waved at me and shut the door. So that's the last glimpse we have of Shanann actually going inside the house, turning around and waving, and then she shuts the door. And you can see in the doorbell footage that Nicole actually stops because she sees Shanann probably turning around, and that's when her brake lights come on. And then just some interesting information. Now, point number 8, the parents faced a hefty court fine with Wyndham Hill Master Association, a homeowners association. They were due in court on August the 24th to face a lawsuit for a $1,533.80 debt. An attorney was not listed in court records for the Watts. This is also something that tells us something about the Watts family. It tells us that they were facing certain obligations, and possibly that they were sort of kicking the can down the road, that they were not, even though they were facing them, they were not actually confronting them. Even though they had these debts, they were possibly trying to avoid them. What I found much later on was that this particular summons appeared to be signed by Shanann Watts, but I think it was forged by Chris Watts, just because I don't think, if you look at the date when it was signed, I don't think Shanann was in the state. So it may be that while Shanann was away, Chris Watts realized actually the extent of their financial difficulty, and it's difficult to know what the dynamics were in the family. Had he argued with her a lot in the past about money, and had he always lost? Was he getting very sort of uptight about things at that point? Was the money one of the main reasons that he was getting sort of worried and feeling a sense of urgency? Or was he just sort of the kind of guy who just didn't really see money as a real thing, almost like a phantom thing, just something where you just get another credit card? I don't really get that impression from his background, but it's possible that the whole Thrive thing turned the whole money-making thing in a very hypothetical thing where reality could be whatever. Number 9, Shanann had a doctor's appointment on the same morning of her murder. She was expected to hear her unborn child's heartbeat for the first time. And so one can expect that day, had Shanann lived, her social media would have been filled with baby messages. There would have been photos of probably the ultrasound, right? And this would have been as early as 10 o'clock that morning. And bear in mind, this was the first time Shanann had been was going to be home after about 6 weeks of being away, and the first thing she was going to do when she got home was basically go and see the doctor and then sort of tell the world about, get back onto the baby narrative. And one can imagine Chris Watts didn't want that. Whether or not Nicole Kessinger knew about it, you can imagine if he wanted to leave Shanann and that he wanted to get divorced and all that kind of thing. He didn't want to be painted as the proud dad. He didn't want to be painted as the proud father of this boy that they'd already given a name to. And he may have sort of been aware of all the controls and smile for the camera and this and that in terms of that magazine article for Strive. And now he didn't want to be in Shanann's story anymore. He didn't want to be part of her social media story. And he could just see how he would be forced to be that with this pregnancy. The pregnancy was locking him into playing this role that he didn't want to play anymore. And how can he get out of this role? In other words, how can he silence Shanann? Can he just ask her not to do it? Well, he did, and then she said, well, I won't say anything until Monday. But then what happens after Monday? Number 11, they plan to name their unborn son Nico, and it's Nico with a capital N. I did get that part right. And then we see an image of Chris Watts with Shanann. It's quite a romantic image. And they're both wearing their Thrive patches, and there they are selling the whole Thrive thing. I mean, I can't say for sure, but I would imagine that this image actually appeared in that Strive article. It was part of the PR. Number 12, a change.org petition started by friends, and there's a link to that, demands that Colorado adopt a new law named Nico's law, also with a K, to make the killing of an unborn baby like the Watts' son first-degree murder. If passed, it will recognize an unborn 15-week-old fetus as having the legal right to life. I'm not sure whether that was ever passed. It would be interesting to find out whether that did ever make it into law. I somehow doubt it. Not because I'm not sensitive to the issue, just because 15 weeks is very, very young. But it certainly does have the legal right to life. Point number 13, another friend had arranged to meet Shanann on the day of her death. Shanann never showed up. Number 14, a drone spotted a bed sheet in a field near the oil tanks. Number 15, the sheet matched the pattern of several pillowcases and a top sheet recovered from a kitchen trash can from Watts' residence early that day. Number 16, Christopher worked for Anadarko Petroleum Company. Shanann worked for Lavelle, a company that sells Thrive health and wellness products. 18, she worked at Lavelle since January 2016 and had become a successful brand promoter, rising to the 80K level. And of course at that point we didn't quite know what that meant. What does the 80K level mean? What we did know was that Christopher's income was close to the 60,000 mark in 2018. Number 20, Shanann had been with her children visiting family for 6 weeks before her work trip. She then returned home on August 7th and left again for Arizona on August 10th, leaving her daughters at home with her husband. 21, Shanann's father is Frank Rusick Sr., the most prominent family member to speak out about the events thus far. What's quite interesting with Frank Rusick is he seems quieter than Sandy, and yet he has been almost the more vocal of the Rusicks. Number 22. On July 31st, Shanann wrote enthusiastically on Facebook about her August plans. "I'm so excited about August! Exclamation mark. Girls and I fly home August 7th. I fly to Scottsdale August 10th to 12th for an amazing weekend with my Lavelle family. Gender reveal for baby Watts number 3. And that was obviously intended for August 13th, which she doesn't mention here, but knowing Shanann, she knew the date of the doctor's appointment, and she intended that day to be the date of the gender reveal. And she knew all of this on July the 31st, which was 2 weeks earlier. And then she was just adding that our team is having lots of success, growth, both personally and business. Several new friends starting their Thrive experience. So it was just promoting how happy she was and how excited she was about August. One should also just bear in mind, in spite of this post, July 9th was when Nutgate happened, and obviously her husband was having an affair throughout the month of July and early August, and was talking to her about the fact that he didn't want the baby, but that only happened between August the 1st and August the 7th or so. If you go through the phone data review, and I've got some of those posts on crimerocket2.com, if you look in particular at around about August 6th and August 7th, she describes that week, that first week of August, as the worst week of her life. So I think some of what she felt here was genuine, but I also think Shanann had kind of no idea what was about to hit her and no idea how to deal with it, which is quite tragic. Just how much the pendulum swung for her from July 31st to 2 weeks later. Shanann ended that post by saying lots of excitement, lots to be thankful for. I'm going to end it there, but in the next episode in the series we'll carry on with the photos taken of the Watts family at Myrtle Beach. But before I deal with that in the next episode, I'm going to be doing a post just again going into the retrospective timeline and looking at how journalism, for example, can mess up the true crime timeline, where facts are reported incorrectly, and then this really messes with the narrative. I've just seen a tweet from Sam Kramer just saying that Kenny may be having a review hearing or sentencing hearing later today, so watch the news for information on that. And then there's also again, just bear in mind on Patreon, a new series I've started there called Ask the Expert. We're just putting pieces together of that of the psychological analysis puzzle as well. So head over there if you haven't already and check it out. Through the course of this week, I will be touching on Cindy Watts in a episode about the enmity against the Ruseks running deep, as well as the dynamic between Chris Watts and Nicole Kessinger that everyone is missing. A question or a thought that I had today was, these people who accuse Nicole, if she was involved, what was her motive? And that's something maybe to address on this channel. Something else coming on Patreon, someone on the outside is helping Chris Watts, and then another new series on Patreon, the Atkinson transcripts. That'll be 15 episodes. Once again, a big thank you to the 7,000 followers on this channel. It's good to have you guys here. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do like, share, and leave a comment. If you haven't been to Patreon, check it out. And then just a quick note that I'm working on a Kindlet. That's quite a short Kindle book on Prince Andrew Demystified. No promises on when that's coming out, but hopefully before Christmas. But until the next episode, thank you for listening.